What kind of master is it that this very moment sees colors with the eyes and hears voices with the ears, that now raises the hands and moves the feet? I didn't really prepare this Dharma talk, but Dharma talk sort of came to me in a way, piece by piece, during Zazen, because I'm sort of busy doing the Jisha job. Then maybe for the better, it was that I didn't write down exact scenario that I'd say, but rather when sitting in Zazen, bits and pieces would come, and I was like, "Oh, wow, that's good. I'm going to say that." And even this text that I just read also came that way. So this is the text from very significant to me personally that I worked with Eido Roshi, who was the founder of this monastery, and he told me when I found this text, and I told him in Dokusan that I have this text that's like sort of sheds a lot of light on what I've been struggling with, but now suddenly I see that it's not as impenetrable as I thought it was. So he said, read this text 100 times. So I thought, how am I gonna keep count? So I made this sheet. This is 100 check marks. So, but I wouldn't say that I fully understand the text even now. So, but I think the idea is that what kind of master is seeing with these eyes and hears with those ears is that it's a question that we hold. And in fact, Basui, who is the one who first asked the question, who wrote this text, he was asking that question in Japanese. It goes, korenanzo, korenanzo. What is this? I heard that when he was dying, he was on his deathbed and surrounded by his disciples. And his last words were, korenanzo. And he says, if you read this text, it says in it that if you keep working at it, and especially at the moment of death, if you ask that question, then in the next life, it will be so easy. You just reach the ultimate nirvana. But I want to say, first of all, that I'm so honored to be here and that I'm really kind of speechless, although I have to speak, that Shingeroshi asked me to give this talk, and I want to thank her for our beloved teacher for guiding us on this path here and taking over from Eido Roshi, who was a great master in his own right, and to be able to continue this practice is really remarkable. So I thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay, sorry. Well, one of the main teaching methods of Eido Roshi was mu shouting. So I remember coming here for the first time in 1982. It was Memorial Day session, and Eidoroshi told me to go out and shout in the woods. But I was very shy and introverted. Maybe I still am, but so he said, go out and shout. So I went out into the woods and I looked around to see if nobody's watching. And I shouted. And later on, it became sort of an obsession, and I was shouting a lot. But so I'm able to produce a loud voice if necessary, but usually my regular tone is very low. So I'll try to speak loud. But I wanted to begin my story back in Poland was when I was a little boy, and maybe young teenager, 12-year-old or something, and I had been very introverted and very shy all my life, but especially in my childhood, and feeling extremely alienated separated from the world to such an extent that I preferred to be sick than to go to school, because going to school was very painful. My alienation was brought to an acute level when I was surrounded by a lot of other kids. So getting sick was like, oh, thank you. I can now stay home and not have to deal with the others. Mm-hmm. So, but I found refuge in books. I read a lot, and in fact, I read an entire encyclopedia. Every item in the encyclopedia. So I was like so hungry to be in contact with the world, but I didn't know how to, and I was somehow not able to. But a little ray of light appeared when my parents gave me a movie camera when I was 14. And I remember the first movie I made was of my building, which I just recorded. I remember it was a late afternoon sun and was casting an interesting shadow on the windows. And I was like, this is the first time I see this building. I haven't really paid attention before. Like, it was the link to the outside world, but with the help of the camera. So kind of later on, I became a filmmaker. So that was probably the beginning of this. But so alienation and trying to overcome alienation is kind of the story of my life. And it had a major, maybe I should, first I thought because my father was a doctor and he got a job in Tunisia. So I was like, oh, great, I'll be able to get rid of my, this thing that I thought was defective in me by changing the environment. So my family moved to Tunisia, which is, I don't know if anyone has been there, but it's a beautiful place on the Mediterranean. And I went to school, like this exclusive boarding school, and I was so unhappy. It was like the same situation, but in a different, prettier and more exotic environment. But I brought the same pain sort of with me to that sort of paradise. So I lived there for 3 years, and then we moved to this country. This was 1972. And I thought, well, the United States, there has to be a change in me somehow, because, it's the greatest superpower. And anyway, I arrived, and at first, really, it was amazing. I remember driving from JFK to Manhattan, towards Manhattan, and at first it was, and the cars were so big. Everything was like overwhelming, but in a good way, I thought. And then on the horizon, beyond the horizon, suddenly these Manhattan skyline began to emerge. It was like the Emerald Sea. It was a miracle, really. And I thought, oh, now I'm home. Now this is going to solve all my problems. And but in the first few weeks or so were fine. But then we were immigrants, so I had to find a job. And I was lucky. My friend found me a job in Columbia University Medical Library. So, but again, I felt like I'm falling into the same alienated state. And in fact, maybe my boss noticed that, and he put me to work in the stacks, like in the basement. So they gave me the nickname the mole. Because I never came out. I just but around that time I found a book fell into my lap. It was called How to Meditate by Lawrence Leshan. And this book so I'm reading this book. I didn't know what it was about because I didn't know the concept of meditation. I thought it meant how to think. But okay, so the author says, okay, now reader, stop reading. Just sit down and count your breaths. So I remember at that point, I was like so unhappy. And so I felt like this giant stone was weighing on my chest, and it was getting heavier. Every day it was getting heavier. So then, going back to the book, I decided I have nothing to lose, so I'm going to try this breath counting. And he recommended counting to 4, not like here to 10. So I did 1, 2, and I did it a few times, and I lie down. I remember I was doing it lying down, and I remember this stone that was on my chest was beginning to lift, and like it sort of rose up to the ceiling and disappeared. And I was really astonished because I tried drugs before, sex, everything, all those things, and nothing really worked. But this practice worked. It was a miraculous revelation, but it wasn't like I was done with the job of freeing myself. It was just the beginning. And then one day I went back to my job, and in the stacks, I discovered there were all these medical books because it was a medical library. But one of the books was orange. It was different. And I pulled it out from the shelf, and it was by this man, Chogyam Trungpa. And it was called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And I started to read it, and I was floored. I was really like suddenly someone was speaking directly to me. Like I discovered that maybe the world is not such a bad place reading this book. So I stole the book. Because I figured these people don't read it in dark verse. They don't need this. So many years later, like maybe 20 years later, I returned it. But at that time, I became a student of Chogyam Trungpa, who is, for those who who don't know, he's if we go to the meeting room, he's in the picture. I just saw him in the picture surrounding Eido Roshi with all the other Roshis, and he's the only one looking different because he's Tibetan. And he was here at the beginning of this monastery, at the inauguration. But in any case, so I went to his monastery, which is located in Vermont, and it's called the Karmecholin, because they had a kind of session, but it's not as intense, but it's close. It's called Datun, and it's 1 month long. So you do a lot of meditation of like Zazen, and but for 4 weeks. So I remember on the 3rd week, something happened that really sort of like blew my mind, and sort of like changed my life, I have to say, because they instructed us to breathe out and then kind of stay there. Breathe out and stay there, breathe out and stay there. And so, but it was kind of boring. And so I had to make it more interesting. So I imagined that I'm a cannonball, and there's a big cannon, and I'm like going out like that. And so then I'm doing it, and suddenly, after one of those out breaths, I realized I'm nowhere. Like I sort of stayed in the space, or in fact, then I realized, to my astonishment, that I was no longer there. Like, where was I? Like, I looked for myself everywhere, and there was no me there. So I was really shocked. And then I sort of like investigated the situation, and I realized that all the people there were like shining, like in a way they were like my brothers and sisters, all of them equally. I didn't have any preferences. This one is, I like this one, I don't like that one. They were all equally the same. Equally, I could give my life to, I could die for any of that. I felt like, I really felt that sense of such intimacy that it's more than intimacy. Like, no difference between me and them, but I'm not even there. So like, it's just like, I can only, there was like pure sort of, but anyway, there was no suffering. So for the first time in my life that I remember, there was zero suffering. So then I thought, also this whole new world view that revealed itself, I thought everything that I learned up to that point, all the books I've read, all that information that in schools and other places, that was all wrong. It was all wrong information. I was being fooled all these years by all this, what the world thinks is true is not true. So, so I thought, okay, now I'm going to have a new life that on this new basis of this new way of seeing. And I thought this would be like no war, no misfortune, this would be like bliss for the rest of my life. But maybe after like half an hour or so, I noticed that there's like an inkling of me coming back. And I was really like, that was very disconcerting. And then this me, so there was zero suffering, zero me, and then 2% me, 2% suffering. It was exact proportion. 50% me, 50% suffering. So then me came back, and it was tragic, really. I felt like, but at least a window was open and closed. But still, when you see your lover or somebody you love or your mother, and then suddenly it's blocked, then it's a very it's a sad, it's a something really painful about that. So in a way, it was like a blessing and a curse, this experience, because then I would always try to recapture it. And I was going like, how did I get to that point? And then try to reproduce that, and it never worked. So, yeah. But Chogyam Trungpa, in one of his books, says, march directly into disappointment. Make it your way of life. It was not such a great consolation, but it was fun. So then somehow somebody invited me to Shoboji around that time. It was like 1982, maybe. Somebody invited me to Shoboji, who was a practitioner there, who I met in a Chinese calligraphy class. And so I went to Shoboji for the first time, and I was blown away by the aesthetics, by the incredible beauty and austerity, like clarity, because Tibetans have a different sense of aesthetics. It's more like ornate, and all colors are very bright: orange, red, blue, gold. And here it was black, white, a little wood color, and green, dark green, and that's it. And everything, the harmony of everything was somehow, I feel like this is my home rather than, the other place. So I decided to do a weekend session at Shoboji. And I remember the pain in my knees. It was horrendous pain in my knees, but somehow I survived. But Eido Roshi was, it was amazing that I could see him in Dokusan. Because in the Tibetan tradition, like I never really saw Chogyam Trungpa in person. Like I saw him when I was in this with other people with him, but never one-on-one. There were people that he worked with one-on-one, I'm sure, but I wasn't. I didn't do that. So, but here, Eido Roshi, suddenly I was in the same room with the Zen master, and he wanted to know how I'm doing. So that was really incredible. And anyway, so I switched my allegiance, and a week later was a session here at DBC. So I signed up right away, and it was in May. It was called Memorial Day. I think now it's a different name. Nyogen Sensei. So as I said before, Eido Roshi asked me to shout "Mu," and that was definitely a liberating experience. That session I'll never forget. Also a lot of pain, and but I think the beauty of the surroundings holds supports. Okay, there's pain, but somehow this makes it okay, because the astonishing beauty constantly, you just it's amazing. Which brings me to this text by Basu. What kind of master is this that is seeing through the eyes? So, well, I'm a visual artist, so I'm focusing on seeing, but other people might say, what kind of a master is it that is hearing? Like a musician would be particularly sensitive to hearing, and someone else, maybe Tenzo-san, potentially for taste, but the master is operating through all these senses. So I have a life, in the where I went to school and studied painting, and then video art, then filmmaking finally. But okay, before we go into this, let's have a drink. This French poet Mallarmé said, "Seeing is forgetting the name of the thing one sees. Seeing is forgetting the name of the thing one sees." So, studying drawing, for example, when you want to draw someone's face, you have to forget that this is the nose, these are eyes, because we have words for those parts of the face. We have words. So when you want to draw, you draw the symbol. Nose is like this, and eyes are like almond shapes. But an artist who sees has to forget those names in order to render it accurately. Then you say, oh, wow, how did he do that? But he simply forgot that this is an eye, this is a mouth. So for me, this was another way in which I overcame the alienation. Was to penetrate through the thick layer of words and names and names. For everything, there's a name, and so that's kind of like a blocking mechanism for us to really see. So one good way to, for example, now if you look around, everything is a name, but there are some nameless things among those that have names. Like in the face, there's an area where there's the cheek, but somewhere between the mouth and the cheek, there's some area that has no name. So if you want to draw something, everybody can draw, I believe, but once you forget that what those things are, then you'll be able to draw anything. So here, like, I'm looking at the altar, and I see in between the Buddha and the candle holder, there's a space, looks kind of like a fish, but it has really no name. So if I drew that, and then I draw all the things around the Buddha that have no name, and slowly come towards him and draw not the nose, but those nameless parts of the face, etc. Eventually, without even trying, I will have drawn an exact and maybe beautiful, or at least accurate portrait of the Buddha, not knowing how to draw, just forgetting the names of those things that we know. So I sometimes, once I learned this, I had a kind of key to the visible world. But interestingly, the visible world outside, I think I discovered that for the inner world, the same principles you can apply. In other words, forget the names. Like if you look at sort of inner landscape, and there is a tendency to call everything by their name, or attributes, names, but like I sort of developed a process that I taught some of my friends, because often people go to museums and they don't really spend any time looking at art, but they just glance, you skim over a great artwork that has so much to offer, and people miss all that because they don't have the skill to stay with it, because it takes stillness to be able to see whether inward or outward, from my experience, and see that if I'm still with something that is even problematic, like for example, nervousness about this talk, I became really nervous, and then I said, okay, just be still and and sort of do this churning kind of emotions, waves. So I just let it be, and it calmed down after a while. But if I try to think about it, then I would get more and more nervous. So in the outside, so-called external reality, for example, when you go to a museum and look at a painting, then just be still for a little while, be still with, and it will reveal itself to you. Also, the eyes have to be not scanning like this, but eyes still relaxed and still, and wait. At first, there's trepidation. At first, you feel, because it's something, I don't know, it's something in us that maybe it's a fear of giving up something. Like there's a fear. I feel it myself. Fear of really being still with something and really look. But if you overcome this fear, because the eye starts to shift around, like the scanning. But if you still the eyes and look and wait and allow it to come towards you, then a moment of intimacy may happen. And you'll be seeing more and more and more things as the longer you look, if it's a rich artwork. And it will, at least that's my experience, it kind of works on your inner state. So you can, I have been using paintings especially, but I guess any landscape, tree, or anything can be used as a tool, speaking of tools, as a tool that can bring peace and even bliss sometimes, or overcome turmoil. Like one time I was heartbroken. My girlfriend said that this is it, and suddenly, and I was really, really upset and really suffering, and I didn't know what to do. So I went to the museum, Metropolitan Museum, and I remember I went with a friend, but then I let him go, and I just stayed with one or two paintings by Philip Guston, the one of but not the late Guston, but early with the abstract. And I stayed with it, and after 3 hours of staring, I was cured. This heartbreak was gone. I got great release. So, but I looked in that way where my eyes still, and I really let it come to me and feel those colors, amazing. Just the energy from the painting filled me and cured me. Paul Cézanne was a great French painter, and he painted a lot. He painted a lot outdoors, actual scenes around his house in the Provence region, and he said he set up his canvas, and he said, "I will not start the painting until I see God." In other words, he looked at the scene, and there was a shift. He no longer saw this is called a tree, this is called this, but he saw he faced the inconceivable, like Daito Kokushi recommends. And then he would start painting, and a revolution in art happened because of that. So it's a very creative way to be, and the words are sort of blocking our way. I mean, words are, of course, we are using words all the time, but to balance words with no reality that transcends words. I guess I'm stating the obvious because this ability to see is very precious, because I realized not so long ago, my vision became cloudy, both eyes, and like I wasn't able to even look at the computer and like recognize the characters. So I went to the doctor, and he said, "You have cataracts, and we have to remove them." And no, I'm not sure if that was the reason, but they changed the lenses in my eyes. They replaced the old lens, which was yellowish and cloudy. They gave me new lenses, so it was kind of astonishing. I was staring at the doctor with my eyes open, and they were replacing the lens. It was like, so then made me think about vision and seeing how temporary and precarious, and it's not to be taken for granted. In other words, it can be with one move of her hand, she could have destroyed my vision, and but she put this new lens, and then I saw the world as if new, like it was. I could before everything was kind of cloudy, and after the surgery, this procedure, I was able to see every leaf on a tree. So suddenly, like all the colors, because with my previous set of lenses, the blue became not so blue; it was orangish. But now I could see this brilliant blue. But that also made me think about how relative that what I thought, I took it for granted that I'll always see, and suddenly I realized it's temporary. It's another aspect of impermanence. And recently, this is another area, but they removed some of my teeth here, so I have like a gap in my side of my mouth now. They're going to put implants after a while, but at this time there's like a gap, so I have to chew with one half of my mouth. The other one is sort of, I sometimes food goes there and I chomp on it, but there's no that normal, so okay, so I realized we are falling apart. Piece by piece, we're losing pieces of ourselves. And our senses, for example, people with COVID, and people sometimes have COVID and they lose the sense of taste and smell. And that's very disconcerting and very can be extremely disturbing to lose a sense. One avenue in which the master is communicating is blocked. So, which brings me, I would like to speak a little bit about my mother, who died in 2003. She had cancer, and she had a kind of awakening before she died, which is sort of apropos we are discussing, because all her life, she was a very political person and very a fighter, extremely angry at the political situation in Poland, because she was forbidden to write by the government in Poland. And she held this tremendous anger and frustration. And so that's the reason why we came to this country, actually, because she wanted to breathe freedom, and speak and write what she wished. And she eventually became editor at Voice of America. So she became the voice of this country. Whereas over there, they prevented them from speaking. And she accomplished her goal, which was to remove communists from power in Poland, and they were gone. So my mother got a gold medal from the new government. But sometime later, she developed this cancer and was really deteriorating. It took some time, and she had time to think. And she was a thinking person, and she was thinking, what is the meaning of life? I imagine, because often she would be in her wheelchair and kind of like this pondering. Like her love of politics and those worldly affairs she was questioning whether that involvement, what it meant. Is there something else? Because she was not exactly a believer. So she probably thought this is it. And what was that all about? So one day she was in her wheelchair and she called me over to where she was, and she said, and she took a piece of lemon rind and she squeezed it so that spray came out. And she said, smell this. So I was like, isn't it amazing that the smell of this lemony kind of fragrance? And from that point on, she became her light began to shine. Whereas before it was like, you could tell that light is disappearing into her. And now she started to shine. And she was not just, everything became alive for her. Like somebody would give her flowers and she said, these flowers are amazing. She couldn't believe, or the beauty of people's faces. Or I remember I went to visit her and she said, the only thing that matters is love. She said it in English. Interesting. And we usually spoke Polish. But, so those were the last words of her that I remember. So the only thing that matters is love. Yeah. So then she died, and I was left with this the question about around the issue of dying, mortality, and I resolved to make a film about that. And at that time, there was my friend John, who Roshi met. He also, his mother died, and he also likewise wanted to make a film. So we decided to make the film together. So we resolved to not to include in the film any doctors or family members or caregivers, just simply the people who are on the verge of dying. So we found 5 people that were willing to be present with us with our cameras. We would go visit those people and just hang out with them. Turn the camera on, and whatever happens will happen. And they gave us of their time and communicated and manifested a state when you know that you'll die. And one of those people was Ram Dass, the spiritual teacher that we went to see in Hawaii. And he, I remember first going to film him, and he gave us a speech, like he has a kind of, he's renowned and all that. So he has he expects people are filming him. So he gave us the standard kind of Ram Dass speech. So we went back and we reviewed this material. It was useless for us because there was nothing new in it. So I thought, how can we make Ram Dass reveal something to us, something real? And I came up with the idea that, so next time we saw him, I said, Ram Dass, you please take us from the place of fear around death to a place of acceptance or peace. He said, sure. And I said, also, you don't have to speak. You can be silent or you can speak. So he said, okay. And then, I said, okay, we will, at first, maybe a little meditation, like you meditate, we meditate, and the camera will meditate. He said, great. And then we turn on the cameras, and this is the beginning of our film, this scene. It's 7 minutes long, and he's not saying anything. But it's very electrifying. His silence is very powerful. And he's about this, you can trace his thought process, and he's about to say something, then a plane flies over, and then he takes a sip of water, and this takes like 7 minutes, and then he says, in this culture, everyone is afraid of death. And then silence, because he had a stroke, and it's hard for him to speak, in a fluent manner, which he used to do really well before the stroke, but after the stroke, as he put it, the word factory has been bombed. So after a silence, he said something along, he showed us that we must go from here to here. So, yeah. So that's kind of what my mom was saying, love is the only thing that matters. So my relationship with DBZ, I think, can be divided into 3 phases. The first one was when I was shunning Mu, and the first I described to you when I first met Eidoroshi. Then I stopped coming here for like 14 years. And then at some point I was really, really depressed. And I remember DBZ, I used to feel so great after chanting Kanzen. So I signed up for a kesse. Do you all know what a kesse is? 3-month long period of staying here. And I remember before I came here, a doctor saw me and says, "You are depressed. I'm going to give you a prescription." So he gave me Zoloft. Do any of you, are you on it? Anyway, it was good because that medication prevented me from going into like really dark places. So I came here while I was taking it. And I remember arriving here and I went to see Eidoroshi in the meeting room, and he said, no, I said to him, I don't really feel so comfortable living in an institution. And he says, this is not an institution. We live here. So like put me at ease that way. And the kesse is a wonderful opportunity to practice because you get a session, and then normally after session we go to the city or somewhere your normal life, and things get confused there, and the session energy kind of dissipates quickly in most cases. But with kesse, it's sort of like half session in the downtime. And so the energy from the first session doesn't dissipate quite as much, and it continues. It's like 3 or 4 hours of zazen every day. So it continues until the next session. So then you go deeper. And then again, after that one, slightly, diminished, normal life, more or less. And then another session, the third one. So for me, it was the first kesse. I remember after the first month, I thought, my serotonin level is really rising. So I reduced the dose of Zoloft by like 1/3. And then after the second month, again, more serotonin. So I feel like even without that additional Zoloft, it's still rising. So as a result, at the end of that kesse, I was off that drug, and I never felt the need to take it again. And I was so enthusiastic, I signed up for another kesse immediately afterwards, and another one. But then my mom got sick and I couldn't continue. But Eidoroshi encouraged me to becoming a monk. He said, this much hair separates you from being a monk. But I never decided to become a monk because I had this other life as an artist, and I couldn't give it up. And now I'm maybe questioning whether that was the right decision or not. But at that time, that's what I thought. So because becoming a monk is a tremendous responsibility, and it's like you dive in 100% into this one thing. But I had this other thing, so I felt like I said in my mind, I remember making calculations. I feel like it's 51% artist, 49% monk. So those of you who are monks, I'm so full of envy and admiration. Yes. Shingaroshi told me that it's okay, there's silence. So maybe let me think about what I have to say next. What kind of a master is it that is hearing the sound of the rain? I remember after Eidoroshi told me to shout "Mu," I took the practice to the city. And I was shouting in my apartment. And this lady who was underneath me became really incensed to the point where she was recording me with outside the apartment, and they took me to court. So in court, she played that recording. The judge was trying to mediate between us. Maybe you can lower the. I think I covered pretty much everything. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the session.